I remember my doctor sitting me down at one point and running through some of the reasons why my blood sugar might be high. And they were really, obvious reasons to me. She mentioned things like if you don't have enough insulin in your system. And I remember nodding and saying, yes, that makes perfect sense. As a person with type 1 diabetes, I don't make any insulin. So if I don't have enough insulin in my system, my blood sugar will be high. Check and check. Makes sense to me. She mentioned things like the certain foods that I was eating. So if I'm eating a food that's really high in carbohydrate content, my blood sugar may go up as a result, especially if I'm not properly counting those carbs and taking the right amount of insulin to cover it. She talked about sick day rules, and that meant that if I was experiencing something like the flu, that my body may rebel and throw high blood sugars as a result. So the stress that my body was under. And that made sense to me too, because we're talking about an increase of cortisol, and cortisol makes my body more insulin resistant. All of this stuff lines up in my head. One of the things that wasn't mentioned to me at the outset, but has been proven to me by 28 years with type 1 diabetes, is that stress, emotional stress, my body feeling stressed, my mind feeling stressed, also lends itself towards high blood sugar. For example, I don't like to fly. That is no secret to anyone who knows me. Getting on a plane stresses me out, makes me feel anxious, makes me feel tense, makes me feel nervous. And that causes my body to release cortisol as a result of that stress. So I have type 1 diabetes and I wear a continuous glucose monitor. So I can see what my blood sugar is doing every 5 minutes by looking at this graph. And so I've seen countless times, because I travel quite a bit, that I go into the airport with a completely flat graph. My blood sugars are in range and look great. And then the second I get on that plane and it's about to take off, my blood sugars take off with it. And it's not because I'm sitting in there mainlining carbs as I'm waiting for the plane to take off. It's because my body is stressed and anxious, and as a result, my blood sugar goes up. And I always found this to be one of the most frustrating parts of life with type 1 diabetes, because that emotional variable has a huge impact on my blood sugar control and is one of the variables I can control the least when it comes to diabetes management. People can say just take a few deep breaths and relax your body, but when it comes to practical application, that's really difficult to do. I can take deep breaths and relax my body, but when that plane's about to take off, my body freaks out, I stop taking deep breaths, and my blood sugar goes up with the plane. This is the kind of dance that I, as a person with type 1 diabetes, have had to do in order to take as many variables as possible into account. Is it a lack of insulin? Perhaps. Is it an excess of food? Perhaps. But could it be emotional stress? Yeah, definitely. And is it hard to predict that emotional stress? To a certain extent, yes. You never know when you're going to end up sitting in traffic or when you're going to end up getting into a fight with your loved one. These things are hard to predict, and it can be hard to take a bite out of that stress response when you don't know it's coming. How do you take a preemptive strike against something that you have no idea is on its way? For the situation with the flight anxiety, it's very easy, very predictable. For the regular course of life, it can be a challenge to take every variable into account. But that's what people with chronic illness do. We try to hope for the best, but we're always planning for the worst, which probably means that I'm stressing myself out preparing for stressful situations. I'm starting to see a weird vicious cycle, but the fact remains, stress impacts blood sugar, and as a person living with type 1 diabetes, this is something that I have to take into account when I'm trying to bring my disease into control. It's enough to stress you out, just a little.